Bishop Aberdeen.
Thank you, Pastor Ryan. Eternal God, our Creator, as we, the spiritual Baptist practitioners, celebrate another year of liberation, we have gathered here on the Zoom platform, Lord, to discuss our faith tradition and how others, particularly those on the outside of our faith, perceive some of our practices and traditions. Father, we invite your presence and ask that your Holy Spirit guide this evening's panel's discussion. Lord, guide the moderator and the panel members, boosting them with confidence and activating the knowledge and skills you have afforded them. Lord, assist them in answering questions on the topic you have afforded them. Father, this topic has cast so much suspicions and condemnation since the inception of our spiritual Baptist faith. We also ask that all those who are attending this discussion will be edified and gain a better and a deeper understanding of experiments in spiritual power. Finally, Lord God, we appreciate all those who have labored in this partnership to bring it to fruition. We are grateful and we are thankful for the collaboration between NALIS and the Academy of Grace Institute of the Holy Spirit. And Lord, we earnestly request that it will be an ongoing partnership resulting in education of adherents, and not just those of our faith, but those who reside in whatever part of the world they reside, Lord. All this we humbly ask in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen, amen, and amen.
Amen.
And thank you back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Bishop Aberdeen. Thank you very much, Bishop Aberdeen. Bishop Aberdeen is one of our associates who resides in Grenada. Thank you very much. Now I want to call on the Deputy Executive Director of NALIS, Ms. Jasmine Simmons. And before Jasmine comes in, I want to remind all of us that this panel discussion is a collaboration between the Academy of Grace and NALIS. And we are extremely grateful, those of us who are members of the Academy of Grace, for the work that we have been doing with NALIS, and we thank them for their support and guidance as we continue to have these discussions and to create more information and more material around any topic that has to deal with African spirituality. I now invite Jasmine to bring us welcome remarks.
Good night, all. Bishop Bridget Aberdeen, Deaconess Janice Burgess, Pastor Ingrid Ryan Ruben, Shepherdess Juliet Forbes, Miss Daniel Fraser, members of the panel, members of the spiritual Shouter Baptist community, members of the media, good night.
Good night.
I see so many familiar faces from last year, and I am excited. I cannot wait to hear what Jamie is going to say. I am really excited. I remember last year we did not even want to come off of the discussion because it was so exciting. Let me go back to my normal speech. It is my pleasure to greet you once again on the eve of one of the most important holidays in Trinidad and Tobago, Shouter Baptist Liberation Day, celebrated each year on March 30th. It is a holiday like no other, born out of faith, resistance, determination, and struggle. Struggle that has now turned into celebration. And I dare say everyone give yourself a round of applause. On this holiday, I am reminded of the words of the national anthem of Trinidad and Tobago. Here, every creed and race has an equal place. And truly, it has been a very long road to equality, but we have reached there. But yet, there is still further to go in our understanding of each other. Last year, we started the conversation on Obeah. And truly, myths, as I predicted, were dispelled. I am looking forward to part 2 of this exciting series, Experiments in Spiritual Power. I am told that some publications are soon to be released from last year's discussion. I do hope that these and this upcoming discussion will be added to the reading material at our schools and, of course, at our libraries. Sometimes we are not the best scribes of our own history, which is why we take hold of opportunities like these tonight to rewrite the wrongs of the past and set the standard for our community. Everyone will appreciate that standards are a thing that we are losing in 2023. It's time to come back and set the standard. After tonight's discussion, I am sure that we would move leaps ahead in understanding ourselves and retelling our history. So, on behalf of the executive of NALIS, we wish you a very fruitful discussion. And to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, happy Shelter Baptist Liberation Day. Please be sure to visit our exhibition on the second floor of the National Library building and online on our website and our Heritage Library Facebook page. I know that we are going to be filled both spiritually and fruitfully and academically. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Yeah, you lifted our spirits with that one, Jasmine. Thank you.
You're very
Thank you.
welcome.
Your enthusiasm, your depth of feeling for this thing. We felt it. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I want we want to tell you a little bit about who we are as the Academy of Grace. Okay, and so that I am introducing my colleague, Deaconess Janice Burgess, a member of the Board of Directors of the Academy of Grace, a member of the member in charge of programming in the Board of Associates. Okay, and I'll introduce her, and she's going to tell you a little bit about who we are. We who are the Academy of Grace Institute of the Holy Spirit. Deaconess Burgess.
Pleasant good night. Ms. Jasmine Simmons, Acting Deputy Director of NALIS and her executive team, our esteemed panelists, our online participants, and my fellow associates, a very pleasant good evening. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the Academy of Grace Institute of the Holy Spirit and to share with you a brief history of the organization and some of its accomplishments. The Academy of Grace Institute of the Holy Spirit is ordained by God to provide for the development of the spirit being. This institute is a local spiritual Baptist non-profit educational institution that exists to contribute to the spiritual development of leaders and members of the spiritual Baptist faith. Opportunities are offered for spiritual development through intellectual spirit journeying of mind and body. The goal of the Institute is to facilitate man's encounter with the Holy Spirit through intellectual pursuits, discussions and workshops, fasting, journeyings, meditation, and prayer. Our core values include, but are not limited to, brotherly love, continued spiritual development, educational excellence, and commitment to the development of the spiritual Baptist faith and Christians of other denominations. The Institute is dedicated to Christian integrity in all aspects of its work. And just a very brief and little history, because most of our participants are returning from last year. So the Academy of Grace Institute of the Holy Spirit has been involved in teaching and delivering of training for the past 13 years. During the period 2007 to 2020, several seminars and workshop programs were specifically created in the development of an understanding of spiritual Baptist theology, rituals, and practices. Television versions of our seminars were aired on television programs in 2018, and these are available on our YouTube channel. The Institute has also published a baptism teacher training manual, a reflection on Psalm 23, and a rosary for women. The Institute has developed signature certificate and diploma programs in theology, ministry, and mission that are intended to provide certified training for spiritual Baptist leaders and members. We also welcome and encourage members of other Christian denominations. In 2020, we initiated the process of registering with the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago. In 2021, in collaboration with NALIS, we expanded our scope and developed an online discussion series designed to offer informed opinions, research findings, and facts about topics related to the spiritual Baptist faith tradition, its development, colonial and current world experience, tangible and intangible to Trinidad and Tobago and the diaspora. In 2021, the first discussion focused on the Prohibition Ordinance and its effects on the spiritual Baptist faith. In 2022, the second edition of the series explored what is Obeah. Tonight, the third edition in the series entitled Experiments in Spiritual Power continues the conversation on Obeah. As we move forward, we plan to continue the conversations about African diaspora spiritual knowledge and understandings which shape our lives in ways that we do not even know. So without further ado, I hand over to Pastor Ingrid Ryan Rubin, our moderator for the session tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deaconess Bridges. Thank you. I realize I had a little bit of internet challenge just now. And so tonight, this is a time for us to talk about what we're talking about today, experiments in spiritual power. And this, as Deaconess Bridges said to us, we began this conversation about Obeah last year. And we had a wonderful time, and we recognized that. And last year we were introduced to a special young man, Professor Brent Crosso of the University of Austin in Texas, who spent a lot of time in Trinidad and Tobago studying Obeah and he spent 15 years, okay, doing his work. And I was so happy to have met him last year. And I spent some time reading his book, and his book is amazing. It's a book that is a must read. Okay, and so that the book called Experiments with Power, written by Professor Crosso, is going to be the feature of tonight's discussion, because he has some amazing concepts in that book, some interesting topics that he raised, and that's going to become the center point of our discussion. Okay. And so now I want to and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I want now to hand over to Shepherdess Julia, who's going to introduce to us tonight members of the panel. And members of the panel, please turn on your cameras as you are introduced so people know who you are, see your face, and hear you and hear about who you are. Okay? Shepherdess Juliet.
Pleasant. Good night, all. Welcome to our second edition. It's wonderful to see you all again, and I hope that you would have as much interaction as we did on our last occasion. So my job is simple this evening. It's just to give you a brief introduction to the persons who will be on the panel today. So I will start with, I hope that I am pronouncing everybody's name correctly, Fidike Castor. She's an assistant professor of religion and Africana studies at Northeastern University and an award-winning author of Spiritual Citizenship, Transnational Pathways from Black Power to IFA in Trinidad. That was published by Duke University Press 2017. She's a Black feminist ethnographer, African diaspora studies scholar of Trinidadian heritage, and Yoruba IFA initiate. She's both inspired by and aspires to create Black liberation imaginaries. Her writings, which can be found in cultural anthropology, fieldwork in religion, talk and the Black scholar emerged from an engagement of spirit with the Black radical tradition and social justice. In her current project, she explores how Black spiritual practices, often drawn from non-Christian religious and spiritual ontologies and epistemologies, shifts centers of being and ways of knowing towards collective care and healing and social transformation. Currently, she is a visiting scholar at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. Next, we have Urtan Sankarali. Mr. Sankarali is a philosopher, parang vocalist, and dissident. He has in the past taught Bible at the Catholic Seminary of St. John, Vianney, and currently lectures in philosophy and religion at St. Andrew's Theological College, a Presbyterian institution. He is the convener of the Shrine Mapping Database Committee that maps Orisha worship spaces in Trinidad and Tobago. He is the author of several books, including of Obeah and Modernity. Burton is an elder of the Orisha tradition. Our next panelist is Ms. Jamie Filbert. Trinidad and Tobago native and Bed-Stuy bred, Jamie Filbert is a growing light from the distant star that fully embraces her shadow. Multidisciplinary artist and educator for over 2 decades, martial artist, researcher, scholar, curator, sister, auntie, lover, mentor, friend, a blessed child of ancestors, and a generator of all things creative. Jamie is a Boer woman, a warrior woman of Kalinda. In 2019, she founded the Filbert Kalinda Technique, PKT, for dance and performance, which is rooted in the tradition and culture of Trinidad and Tobago's sacred martial art form, Kalinda, and serves as an artistic safe house and vehicle for this African Caribbean ancient futuristic technology. This initiative is supported by and co-created with master martial artist Rondell Benjamin, founder of the Boer Academy of Trinidad and Tobago, and the transitioned legendary Boer one, King David Matthew Brown. The PKT dance and performance technique has been taught at a number of undergraduate and postgraduate programs for universities and cultural institutions throughout Trinidad and Tobago, North America, and Europe. In 2021, Jamie was named a Caribbean Regional Woman Game Changer, dominating in her respective field by Loop News Caribbean. As a martial artist, she trains in combatives, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, rope jab, whip fighting, stick, gilpin, and piper studies. Her artistic works are rooted in the quantum archaeology of extrasomatic praxis, or allowing spirit to curate the space from which the art comes and where it is destined to be through cycles of memory, play, dream, language, reconfiguration, and the limbs, soul, and heart of the art. Jamie is the founder of Art on Purpose, a multifaceted organization delivering social and cultural awareness through professional creative arts education. She currently serves as pointer of Boer Academy of Trinidad and Tobago, where the work is focused on the veneration, immersion, propagation, and archiving of Kalindas, its ancestors, and living practitioners. Jamie believes in the power of art and its ability to heal and create dynamic change. She dedicates all her movements and magic to the legacy of her transitioned parents, Dennis and Veronica Filbert, and all of her ancestors. Katie Brown is an assistant professor of religious studies at University of Texas, Austin. She is an ethnographer and scholar of African diaspora, religious and African American studies. So research examines the intersections of religion, race, gender, and sexuality, material culture, and the senses in the Caribbean and Latin America. In particular, her work focuses on revival Zion religion, an understudied African heritage, indigenized form of Christianity originating in Jamaica. Katie holds a PhD in African and African American Studies from Harvard University, and her work has been funded by awards and fellowships, including the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation, the Global Religion Research Initiative at the University of Notre Dame, and the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at the Texas University. And last, but by no means least, G. Brent Crossan, Associate Professor, Director of Caribbeanist Labs on Religion and the Lillis Caribbean Studies Initiative, the University of Texas at Austin. He is the author of Experiments with Power, which was published in the University of Chicago Press 2020, and is the winner of the 2021 Clifford Geertz Prize. Professor Crossan says, I work and live in Austin, and I recognize these lands known as Texas as the nations of the Alabama, Coushatta, Caddo, Carrizo, Comcrudo, Oahuitican, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lepan-Apache, Tonkawa, and other indigenous polities. These are the panelists tonight. Your moderator tonight, again, is Pastor Ingrid Ryan Reuben. She's a senior pastor and senior mother at the St. Cecilia's Spiritual Baptist Church and Healing School, Faizabad, and principal associate of the Academy of Greece Institute of the Holy Spirit. Pastor Ryan Reuben is a theologian trained at the Seminary of St. Venery and the Ugandan Martyrs, who continues to seek to empower especially spiritual Baptist practitioners with knowledge of the source of their spiritual essence. An ardent researcher, Pastor Ryan Reuben continues to study, write, and publish works about the spiritual Baptist faith and its traditions. Pastor Ryan Reuben holds a master's degree in public management and bachelor's degrees in social work and theology from the University of the West Indies at St. Augustine. She is also fairly fluent in Spanish, having studied and lived in a Spanish-speaking country for several years. These are your panelists and moderator this evening. I hope that you do enjoy the discussion, and back to you, Pastor Ryan.
Thank you very much, Shepherd Juliet. Tonight, I want to welcome those who are here from the United States of America. Welcome those who are here from Trinidad and Tobago, those who are here from Barbados and from St. Lucia and from St. Vincent. Welcome. Tell us where you are from. I've seen that some of you are from some of those places. Welcome to all those from the diaspora, from Grenada, who are here and spending time with us this evening. And so we come to that place where we're going to start our discussion. And I want to say a special thank you to Jamie Filbert. Jamie is currently in Wales, and it's either midnight or half past midnight at this time. Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you very much for making the sacrifice and for joining us this evening. And so Brent Crossan. Brent wrote this book called Experiments with Power. And the first line of his introduction, he says, I did not want to write a book about Obeah. He starts by saying that. And then by the third page of this introduction, he said, initially I envisioned my project as showing that Obeah was a religion. He said, that's what he saw. And so the approach you're going to take tonight is, and look, somebody says, clocking in from Miami. And the first thing I want to trouble Brent about is, and so that Brent and I will have a little discussion before we begin to pull in the panelists. And so I want to ask Brent Crossan, why did you feel the need to vindicate Obeah and declare it as a religion?
Pleasant good night to everyone. Thanks so much, Pastor, for organizing this panel. I'm really honored to be here, and thanks to all the panelists and for all the introductions. So yeah, I feel like I didn't want to write a book about Obeah because I was working in Moruga, and Moruga had been carried the stigmas of Obeah. And one of the first things that happened when I was there was a series of events where students at the local secondary school displayed behaviors that people classed or called possessions or demonic possessions in the national media, and this attracted national media attention. And it brought up all these negative ideas about Moruga being attached to Obeah, and then newspaper articles would equate that with witchcraft or African witchcraft, as they called it. And so I saw all these negative stigmas, and I saw the ways that people, wanted to distance themselves from those stigmas to not be considered, backwards or to be associated with these kind of negative perceptions of the area and of Moruga. And I saw that Moruga was a forward-thinking place, a diverse place, and so I thought, that I wouldn't want to kind of focus on Obeah and rather focus on something else. But Obeah kept coming up for me, and so initially I wanted to vindicate Obeah because of the negative stigmas attached to that term, which go back to its entrance into the colonial record and its initial criminalization in association with Tacky's Rebellion, or the Coromantee War of 1760, in which Obeah was not just there, but also in Antigua and other places, was charged with inciting slave rebellions and was attached to slave resistance. And so from that criminalization onwards through the criminalization across the Anglophone Caribbean, Obeah's kind of accumulated a lot of baggage, a lot of negative baggage. And so that's why I wanted to try to vindicate Obeah.
Why declare it a religion?
I think it can be a religion. And I in the sentence after that, I say that, I thought that being a religion in my naive mind meant that one, that a religion would not be associated with power and would not enact harm. Now, when I actually think about it, there's no kind of religion that is immune to the possibility of enacting harm or of being involved with some form of power. The Catholic Church, for example, has enacted many forms of harm. That's not to say that's all that it does, but I think that there's always that possibility. And so Obeah, and I should say initially I wanted to use the term spiritual work rather than Obeah, but since we're going with Obeah, when I talk to spiritual workers, they're often healing or protecting people from forms of harm that have been enacted against them. And so while that's Obeah, and that's something that would be condemned or counteracted by that spiritual worker, that very work of healing and protection could also be called Obeah by somebody else, or even sometimes by that spiritual worker. So Obeah can't be reduced to either simply to a kind of simplistic notion of religion. And I think what I was trying to do in the book is to say that Obeah helps us to rethink the category of religion itself and to include forms of spiritual power and problem solving as a part of, or at least a legitimate part of religion.
Yeah, which is what most religions are about. Legitimate power, legitimate intervention in people's lives spiritually. Why is your book titled Experiments with Power?
Well, it was a term that one of the spiritual, or two of the spiritual workers used to talk about work that was done to redress a series of killings that happened in Moruga, where the police or police officers killed 3 people, and that also made national news and became an ongoing, very long and drawn out court case. But at any rate, there was certain forms of spiritual work that was done to try to bring those police officers to justice, because for the people and the loved ones of those that were killed by the police, there wasn't they weren't very hopeful about the justice system actually prosecuting the police, because initially the 3 that were killed were framed as criminals of some kind, even though that was later disproven. And so spiritual work was done to try to enact justice, to bring those officers to justice. At the same time, people talked about that the police were doing spiritual work to try to protect themselves from the spiritual work that others were doing.
Okay.
It's always a kind of complicated field, but the spiritual workers talked about these experiments with power that were being done to intervene in the justice system. And for one spiritual worker, she called what she did experiments. Some people call it work. Some people could call it wanga sometimes in Muruga. Well, that word's not used that often. But she called it experiments because she was intervening in a situation to try to solve a specific problem. And there might be different tools that one had that would be appropriate for one problem, but not for another. And so she had to draw on a kind of diverse toolkit and employ that in a kind of specific situation. And she called that experiments. And so I started to think about this kind of, religion, all religions have a traditional orientation where you kind of do something the same way, or try to do something the same way every time for a specific occasion. But then there's also this problem-solving, pragmatic orientation, and that's what I was trying to get at with
that particular term.
Yeah,
You said,
drawing on this, what the spiritual workers said about experience.
I'm continue to be intrigued by the whole concept of experiment with power. You said when you make an offering to the powers, quote from your book, make a talisman guard, draw a seal, or fix a house, you are performing an experiment. I thought that was, for me, that was very profound as a practitioner, as a spiritual Baptist practitioner who is involved in some of these experiments. I thought that was such a profound explanation. And so that I continue to be intrigued by the whole idea of this experiment with power, that you try these different things in an attempt to, because you're never sure. It comes like, and as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, when doctors find you with a particular illness, they say, well, let us try this and see if it will work. And they give you this medication, and it doesn't work well for you while it's working well for somebody else. And so then you try something else and it works with you. And so that's what's happening in my head. And so that it is interesting that the worker said what he did is an experiment, hoping that this will, if it doesn't fix it, then you'll try something else. I continue to be intrigued by that. How do you reconcile the derisive attitude of some practitioners towards the practice of the art of Obeah? Whatever is defined as Obeah.
Yeah, I just love the point you just made about the doctor, because I've currently been going to a lot of doctors, and so I see that kind of. It's not, I should say, it's not, doesn't mean just try anything, right? They have to have some, like a spiritual worker or a doctor would have some basis for trying something, but.
You have to have your medicine cabinet. You have to have your protocols for it, and then what you could try to put something together to make it work. Okay.
So it's still based on knowledge and experience, but yeah. But this derisive attitude towards Obeah, I started the book with that because I lived with a family who are Rastas, and the father, he, was kind of derisive towards Obeah, and it's I think derisive would be more like an attitude towards Obeah as being kind of laughable or kind of silly or something like that. So he said, I could do Obeah, if somebody comes to me and says, my neighbors are trying to mash up, my relationship, and we're quarreling all the time, and he would be like, okay, see, this is holy water, I'll give it to you. What you have to do is every time you feel like you're about to quarrel, you put it in your mouth and hold it there for 30 seconds. And then you swallow it, and then the quarreling will stop, So this is a kind of derisive, kind of poking fun attitude. For spiritual workers, I don't know if their attitude is necessarily derisive, but it could be something like drawing moral distinctions or condemning the spiritual harm that they thought others might enact. And so
While they're working on the other side. One
yeah,
working on the dark side, one working on the light side.
yeah, and sometimes that could be an accusation too. You know, somebody else, the person that could be accused of that might say that they're not doing that, or that they have certain moral standards. You know, so I think it can be, that can be a little relative too. But the derisive attitude, you know, like the father of the family changed his attitude, and I read about that, how he kind of, you know, started to feel like he was being more drawn to this, what he called, you know, African way of doing things, and he associated that with the possibility that the dead could be present in the world of the living. And he experienced that when his wife died, and he would like have these experiences where his wife would visit him. And so there weren't negative experiences, actually, there were positive ones. And so, you know, I think over the course of our relationship and me living with them and everything, and, you know, he's a very open person. He's always trying to reason through things. You know, he kind of came to have a somewhat different attitude towards Obeah. You know, when I brought this, I had a copy of the 6 and 7 books of Moses, and I brought it back there, and, you know, he was like, oh, that, you know, that's ridiculous. But then the book showed up missing, you know, and I found it later, you know.
Yeah, you brought him a prize. Because as much as he was derisive, he was interested.
Yeah.
You know, I before we continue, when I read about the water, you know, it is something that is very prevalent in the spiritual Baptist faith tradition, but also in African traditions. This glass of water. This glass of water has a unique place in, you know, in our faith tradition. We use a lot of this glass of water. And my mother, I remember my mother when I read that part, I wrote a note about that. And she will always tell you, take a sip of water. Really, that is really like my other friend June says. She said, I said, keep your mouth shut. Say nothing. Every time you feel to say something, take a drink of water. But also, water has also been used in our faith tradition to quench the fiery darts, to cool things down. My mother was a master at it. She will get up with a glass of water. We all talk about it. She will get up with whenever she wants a glass of water. But when she finishes the glass of water, everything is calm. And so that has a particular significance for some of us in the spiritual Baptist faith tradition. Now, from your research, what is responsible, you would think, for the general public attitude to what, last year we spoke about what is Obeah. We spent a lot of time defining it, coming up with, and we spent a lot of time talking about why there is this negative towards it, why people believe it's about evil. And we spent a lot of time talking about the origin of the word, and what brought us to the place where it became illegal, and therefore that illegality made it into something that is dark and dismal. Okay? How do you reconcile that derisive attitude of some practitioners towards the practice?
Or justice seeking in some way. And so I felt like it's not quite as simple as there being like a 100% negative attitude towards Obeah in the Caribbean. I feel like there are definitely really negative attitudes towards Obeah, or towards Harry Potter, or towards Ouija boards, or tarot cards, or a whole, you know, number of things that could be associated with, you know, I guess.
Unless it's in your favor.
What's that?
Unless it is in your favor.
That is, yeah, unless it's
okay. You will go, so that people will go to the Obeah man, as they say, for healing and be happy with what happens to them, and then they'll go for him for retribution. Okay, yeah. And so that and that's why our discussion last year was about that the people who were in charge of the governance had the power to stop the operations in the spiritual field. Okay, so that it will impact them negatively. And so there are two sides to everything. Yeah, I want to. Just before you answer, Brent, I just want to tell people, those who have questions, please put it. Please send your questions to Shepherdess Juliet. Okay, please, and we'll deal with your questions at the end of the discussion. Okay, so that you can ask questions, we will take note of it and we will explore them after. Yes, sorry, yes, go ahead, Brent.
Oh, no, I was just going to say in terms of, a lot of spiritual workers will say that they don't do retribution, or they don't, if somebody comes to them asking for that, they won't do it.
Yeah.
But in the case of the police killings, where there was this injustice, some of the spiritual work was in fact looking for some kind of redress, at least, or some kind of, I don't know whether to call it retribution, but a balancing of the scales for this injustice. And so, in those cases, though, it has to be, justified for the spiritual worker.
Because it has to make some kind of preventative action that you will know that you can't do that again. It keeps people in check. Like the law does, that's what the law does. It keeps you in check. This is what's going to happen if you do this. And so that's another way of keeping people in check, I guess. Okay, because you know what is possible to happen if you walk that road again. How is Obeah a technology of justice making? There's a statement you made in the book. I mean, from what you're saying, and people are understanding that, but you use this term, a technology of justice making.
Yeah, I was using the word technology and also the word science, because, Obeah is called science or high science sometimes. To kind of to use a word that's legitimating and more elevated, but also I think appropriate in some way, in that Obeah is a technology, and it often involves justice, and so a lot of the spiritual work that I heard about did involve people's encounters with the justice system, or with police, or trying to change the outcome of a court case. Even I heard about police officers who were dealing with corrupt superiors, who were trying to get out of a difficult situation with those superiors. People that felt like they were wrongly accused and were trying to be vindicated in courts of law. And so, there's a lot of stories about Obeah as interacting with the formal state. Like you said, that Obeah, even as the justice system, that, colonial justice system was trying to destroy it, Obeah became an alternative kind of justice in some way.
Okay, interesting. Brent, you said that this book is animated by the dead. Explain.
Well, I was talking about the death of the wife of the father of the family that I was living with, and she passed away, and that experience, not just of her death, but the wake and the burial and the funeral afterwards, transformed not only my own attitudes, but also, like, as I said before, those of the father of the family, who, through experiencing her presence after she died, it kind of changes attitudes toward what he had thought of as Obeah. And I felt like, also, just because I lived with them, and it was my attachment to that family that made anything that I was able to do in Moruga possible, because I couldn't just go in there as an outsider. And
okay.
So
and that helped.
Yeah.
Okay.
That kind of, I'm saying that, yeah, I was trying to say that her, she passed away, but that her, her spirit, or her force,
spiritual presence was still very strong in the space.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Since I was a child, I have heard the term graveyard work. And it was always spoken about in a negative way. And you have referenced that in your preface to the book. What is graveyard spiritual work?
Well, that's a good question. I saw it a few times, and I'd hear stories about people say going into Hangman's graveyard, which is a very kind of negative negative, I guess negative thing, where you're going to get this spirit of the dead that's like going to be potentially like pretty aggressive. Which, however, the work that I saw in the graveyard was either for justice making or for healing. Like, for example, I saw, there was one guy that he would, he worked in the graveyard and he worked on the grave of an Indian holy man he called Sahib. And he was an African spiritual worker, like on the African side, but he would work with like the spirit of this Indian holy man. And so he would take people to this grave. This was before they were allowed to cremate in Trinidad. His cremation was illegal for a time. So it's like a grave mound. And so he'd place people on top of him, and he called it his operating table. And he would do, spiritual work on top of it.
The grave site was the operating table.
But yeah, he called it his operating table.
Yeah, okay.
But like in the preface, I'm not really talking about like that kind of graveyard work. In the preface, I was just talking about like the wake after the death of the wife and the family that I lived with, and how it showed like a different attitude towards the dead. For example, like his name is Rati. That's just people know him by Rati. He's always dreaming about the dead. And so he dreamt that, she was waking him up to like go to dig her grave. And so he would like had stayed out too late, but he like woke up and went to like help dig her grave. And there's all kinds of stories about that. And he said, in the book, I quote him as saying, I don't believe, when you're dead and you live a good life that you go away somewhere else, that I believe, you stay here. That's a contested ideology, and it sometimes draws the line between Christianity and or certain forms of Christianity and non-Christian for people, because it's a question of what happens after one dies and whether the dead can continue to interact or be with the plane of the living in some sense. And so I wasn't talking about that kind of like going into the graveyard and doing some spiritual work. In that sense, I was talking about the wake and the ways of communing with the dead, that wakes are like one of the most important social events in Moruga. And so wakes are just like such a rich tradition, but it's like communing with the dead in some way. So
yeah, because I believe that the spirits are still here for 9 days.
Yeah.
And that's why some people try to interfere with that movement. And people who are deep spiritualists try to interfere with that movement and keep people here so that they could get some work done. I think that was I've been told. Why was Obeah, let me ask you this, associated with harm and immorality?
Yeah, I think just for the reasons that I said. It does have to do with the colonial baggage and the British choosing like that as the word to criminalize and like place all this negativity onto. I think it's also kind of a way, it has something to do with, I think, a Western tradition of trying to separate religion from magic in some way, and trying to say religion isn't about instrumentality or isn't about problem solving. It's just about like the ethereal, and magic is what, tries to get something done and is pragmatic. But I think those lines are blurred in practice. And so I think Obeah kind of carried all those stigmas, and so it got associated with harm and immorality. And this is a tendency also to racialize or stigmatize, to see forms of spiritual harm as being associated with African traditions that I see all over Latin America and the Caribbean. For example, today I was talking to a spiritual worker in Colombia, and for him, the epitome of like the most harmful kind of spiritual work you could do was voodoo. And you see that all over the Caribbean too, where
just 1 second, Brent. Juliet, please turn on recording. We didn't do that. Thank you. Yes, Brent, sorry.
No, it's okay. No, so you just see that with voodoo or voodoo, that this kind of thing that's thought to be at once like maybe most authentically African by some, or, is also generally
Recording in progress.
generally stigmatized as being like the most harmful or immoral thing, So I think it's just a product of this kind of racialization just a product of kind of racism or anti-African ideologies, that got carried down. Yeah.
Now, I want to go back just before we go into getting responses from the other members of the panel. You use the word power to define Obeah. What does that mean when you use that word, power?
It's a great question. Yeah, I talk about how, power and a variety of other words can have these expanded meanings in the, Trinidad's English Creole, where, power can refer to, I guess, the idea of political power or economic power, but then power can also be like catching power or calling down the powers, or where the power would be like what, an anthropologist might refer to as, a deity or a spirit or something like that. I mean, so I think that I was trying to get at the sense of power being both spiritual and also what all the other ways that people use power, and where it has multiple meanings in the Trinidad's English Creole. And so power, while it's kind of secularized in the West, there's, or at least ideally, there's this way that power in Trinidad has spiritual meanings that I think are, valuable and illuminating.
Yeah, particularly the way we spiritual Baptists use the word power, because we talk about catching power. And for me, meaning that getting a chance to operate under the power of God. And so that power is really about appropriating God's power for some time, for a period of time, and using it, which is an interesting thing to discuss. You say that Obeah is hidden power associated with harm and healing, retributive and consoling. My question is, how do we harness that positive for the future?
Yeah, I think keep doing what you're doing. It seems like great work, and I think there's a lot of power in spiritual work, and I think that there'll continue to be, people will continue to have maladies or forms of harm or spiritual malaise or problems in their life. We're all going to have problems in our life, and it's about using that spiritual power to solve those problems, to heal and create well-being. But there'll always be problems out there. So
and they'll always need power.
Yeah, that's what we need. Spiritual power. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you very, very much. And so I now want to ask Kylie, and Britain, this question is also for you. Obeah is conceived by many as a science or experimentation. And how do we find it? Or experimentation, how do you define it? And based on your definition, can it be taught and passed on? This is for Kylie.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here. I think I'm the only non-Trini or non-Trini affiliated person. So I am bringing greetings from Jamaica via Austin. And before I really answer that, I also wanted to pick up on some things that Brent had said as well around thinking about the idea of religion and whether or not Obeah can be a religion, right? And, in the work that I've been doing, thinking about, as a scholar of religion, you're constantly thinking about how do we define religion? What is religion, right? And in the work that I do on Revival Zion in Jamaica, a lot of times what you see happening is things that you do are considered religion, but things that other people do, that's a cult. or that is Obeah. And so even the category of what is a cult versus what is religion and what is legitimate, comes into this argument about how do we define proper religion and what we think of as decent religion. Yes, absolutely. And then even also thinking about the idea of science, and the Brent's book, Experiments with Power. And I really like that because we can pick up on that in so many different ways. And I'm curious also to know the other synonyms for Obeah in Trinidad as well, because in the Jamaican context, and Brent brought it up a little bit too, we have, you call it science, or sometimes you call Obeah men professors, or you call them scientists, or sometimes you call them doctors, right? And so all these terms that are really also picking up on this idea of experimentation, of science, of some kind of way to think about the world in ways that also, I think, prove that it is rational, right? Because a lot of times in the colonial context, the things that African people do are considered irrational, things that, are, foolish, or this kind of charlatanism and this sense of, illiteracy or lack of understanding why people engage in particular things. But I think part of claiming it as a science is also saying this is logical, this is rational, we're actually doing something that makes sense and that has something behind it. And even when we're talking about power, right? Like even thinking about tying that to the concept even of electricity, right? Power is a kind of energy. It's something that animates, something that gives life to other kinds of things. And so I wanted to sort of pick up on that and just say that before I forgot about it. And even so, another term that we use for Obeah in Jamaica is called guzzle. I don't know, do Trinidadians say guzzle?
That's new one. First time hearing the word.
Okay, so it's a word called guzzle, and I think parts of the theorizing of how we get to that word is looking at Central African origins and Congo words, right? And so in Congo, there's several categories of kinds of ritual healers, and so you have female prophets that are called Kingunza, and you have this idea also of Ngunza. And so that's part of where we think we get the word guzzle from. But also this idea of guzzle is this idea that in this African framework, when you're thinking about healing, when you're thinking about wholeness, it's two parts. There's science on one part and there's spirituality on the other part. And both of those things are working together to sort of create health and wellness in people, right? So even when we're thinking about experiments, when you go to certain kinds of ritual specialists and revival Zion assessment and decide sometimes spiritual problem that requires spiritual resources, and then sometimes it's actually a scientific problem where you need to go to sort of a regular allopathic doctor to work on it, but you have to kind of figure it out and make a diagnosis to decide which situation it is, right? And so even as I'm thinking about that,
is the person spiritually sick or physically sick?
Yes, absolutely. So figuring out, yes, so diagnosing which one it is. And then when you figure out that one, if it's a spiritual sickness, of course, then you have a set of remedies that, go with that as well. And so I don't even know if I answered the original question that he asked, but I wanted to sort of frame that before I forgot.
Yeah, so you have defined it for us. Is Obeah, the next question was, is Obeah spiritual science of practice rather than an organized, tested practice? Give us a lot of that in your response, just now. You figure out whether it's your diagnosis. Do you talk about the diagnosis that some people go there for the diagnosis, and your next turn is the doctor, or you come back for a spiritual, some kind of spiritual ritual that will free you of whatever is hurting you. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that, Kaiti. Thank you very much. You will make me want to have discussions with individuals. We have a lot of and sort of. Fadeke has asked me for her to come in a little later. Okay, so I just want to bring in Jamie here for a little bit, and to answer. Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning.
What time is
Morning
it?
and night and evening and afternoon to everybody. Thank you for having me.
Now, we've noticed stick fighters start their activities with spiritual activities, which resembles spiritual Baptist and Orisha rituals. Okay, resembles.
Are you
Because
my head tilting?
some stick fighters, okay? When we see that, we try to look for where's the connection. Okay, what is this? Wangan, tell us about the source of that spiritual power that lead that because it's obvious in the stick fighting arena that there's some connection, some attachment, some very close attachment to some kind of spiritual power.
So I want to first say that there is evidence from the practitioners of the Kalinda community and historical and academic that spiritual Baptist, Orisha, Kalinda are three different African spiritual powers, if you will. Inside of Brent's book, he talks about an overlapping. Now, I can agree in an overlapping that may have transferred in some sort of way. Overlapping, however, does not contain governance. When we talk about governance, we talk about who rules the space. Yeah. So while something may look like one thing, that does not mean that is what is going on. Pouring of rum is an African thing for spirituality. Yeah. So if you see pouring of rum one place, you want alcohol, rum, alcohol, libation, water, right? You wouldn't necessarily conflate and say, oh, this is that because they're doing this thing over here. There are no, to my knowledge, not just to my knowledge, but to my experience, and also sitting with my elders, there are no Orisha rituals that happen at the beginning of stick fighting or inside of stick fighting rituals. Yeah. Kalinda is not governed by Ifa or spiritual Baptist, nor is Ifa governed by Kalinda, nor is spiritual Baptist governed by Ifa, and so forth and so forth. Yeah. And for me, why it's important to make that point is because we do something where the transatlantic slave experience makes things sometimes that it's this. And yes, while we are one people, Africa is a continent. It's not a country. There are several languages, thousands of religious and spiritual beliefs. So why would it change once we reach the Americas? Yeah. No, I would also say that there's reasoning inside of why we would need to join forces. So if you are Orisha during the 1800s and I as a Kalinda person and I have my rituals, I'm from Congo or wherever, right, are Bantu derived, and we need to gang up on the oppressor, yeah, we might combine some things, right? And when I say combine, doesn't mean that we mix in things, but I would want to take some information from you. If you, Ingrid, have a recipe for bread, my mommy have a recipe for bread, but you want to give my extra ingredient, I might try it. Yeah, to make my tail a little bit better. Or I may be missing something that I normally would have, and you might have something to replace that thing. Yeah, so I just want to make that clear first of all. The rituals inside of stick fighting and this power that we're talking about inside of that space are, I would ascribe it to Jambi, which I think that across the Caribbean, we can talk about that, yeah? Or we've heard that word in some respects. Some people would say it's an external energy. In Kalinda, it's not really external, it's a part of you. And I think I explained this last year in terms of your shadow. So the question that I always ask is, does your shadow ever leave you? No, right?
No. No.
Your shadow doesn't leave you, right? So when light appears,
so you can't run away from it.
Just like you see my shadow in the back?
Yes.
And if I block the light, the shadow didn't go anywhere. It's just that the light exposes the shadow. So it makes you think about when they talk about Obeah or Wanga or any spiritual practice inside of African diasporic frames. The absence of light is not just the presence of darkness. You catch that? And the presence of darkness is not the absence of light. Yeah. So it's very similar with a jambi. The jambi is not like a mounting, right? So a jambi does not mount a calendar practitioner. I'm walking with my jambi constantly. My jambi is with me. My job is to understand when and how to call my jambi. Yeah. So somebody could make me vex. I cannot get to the point where I allow somebody to pull my jambi outside of me. I had to call my own jambi. If I allow somebody else to control that thing inside of me, problems. If we think about it from, and I don't want to keep going back to that time because I think it's very important that we think about it in this time. I think that our ancestors did a tremendous amount of work and we have more work to do. Yeah. So we have to understand what happened in the past, but understand what is going on now. So very simple. I am many people in them university. Yeah. There are times and there are moments where they just make me want to jump outside myself. They do not have the power to make me jump outside myself. And they could use power in the frame of Obeah, Wanga. I have the power, but I have to remember that I have the power. That goes for the neighbor that trouble you. That goes for the co-worker that trouble you. That goes for your pastor. That goes for your friend, for your mother, for your child. You have to be in control of yourself, but it is something that is a practice of living. Yeah. So your jambi is a part of your practice. How do I train my jambi? It's how I train myself. How I train my stick is how I train myself. Yeah. So for me, calendars governed by that energy. And I would also say a host of different energies as well. But jambi is like one of the main energies that I would say that resides there. I hope that I answered the question.
Yeah. I wonder how much of Obeah is intentional application of high-level science, biochemistry, state-altering drugs, oils, aromatics, herbs, careful management of the placebo effect. I mean, how much of it is not only spiritual science, because spiritual science might lead to a place of understanding how to use science. Because, for example, my example always has been so that somebody is sick or somebody has an issue, and I've been led to mix milk with blue in a glass of water and give them to drink that, or to pour that as a libation. Okay? And the practitioner doesn't always or necessarily understand what is the interaction of one with the other, and therefore what the impact that it could have. But because they were led in their spirit to do that, they trust their spirit. And practice over time means that when I use it, it works. I don't understand the chemistry of it, but then there are those who do. I want you to respond to that.
So I'll go backwards. So if we understand what a placebo is, right? So to
make you feel that you do that it working.
I want everybody in the room to understand, right? Yeah. So a placebo is sometimes when they're doing experiments on like cancer patients or anyone, they'll give them the drug that they think is going to heal them. Yeah. And then they'll also have patients where they'll give, which it's not the drug, it's basically sugar water. Yeah. Right? But they're telling them like, I'm not the experiment, so I'm not going to tell you which one it is I'm giving to you. Obeah, our Obeah, because you are the Obeah. Let me make that clear, right? The work that you do is the Obeah. All that is Obeah to me, right? In my opinion. If we understand that Obeah or anything that we do, for that matter, requires energy, it requires your body, it requires intention. Now, that is just the basic. Let we call that the placebo. Yeah. The actual Obeah, the high science of it, comes in when I add words, when I start to use semiotics or symbols inside of it. Yeah? So now go into another level. Now, there might be other levels, oils, herbs, I've taken a bush bath, all these different things, yes? And I've also employed someone else who has a certain hierarchy inside of the Obeah practice or Wanga practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or who I can see on the camera, shake your head if I'm making sense. If I'm not making sense, tell Jimmy, stop talking, you're not making sense. Right? So it's the same thing if, like when Brent went to sit down and write his book, there was an intention that he had, right? He had his buddy and all the buddies in Moruga that he would encounter. Plus the buddy of the I'm not going to call it dead because I don't believe in the dead. My people don't dead. African people don't dead. We are in a cycle. Yeah. So we return and we stay with, we are ancestral people. Yeah. So at the end of the day, we have to stop using words that don't make sense. I want to tap back for a second. Another word that doesn't make complete sense to me if we think about it etymologically. Religion is monastic. So none of our forms is really religion. We do not need the credibility of Western words or any type of Western anything to describe what it is that we have and what our ancestors have given us. Yeah? Religion binds in a certain sort of way. Yeah, okay, so we could take that part of it and say, okay, we bind in things. But we practice. Yeah? We are always in practice, which is why if we do not do our rituals. So I give you the placebo. The effect of both things, the actual Obeah and the placebo, is that both parties are going to do the ritual of the Obeah. Both parties are going to do it. What is going to make it work is you have to believe, right? So even if I'm not really getting better, if I believe that I'm getting better, something will believe I will be better.
I will be better. Yes.
Right? It's that belief. And I believe that is something that has sustained us as people in our practices. I believe that everything that we do, because we are sacred people, right? Everyone inside of this Zoom right now is sacred. I sacred, you sacred. If I do not treat you in that way, we have a problem. If I don't believe that automatically, we have a problem. Yeah? Our Obeah is not going to align. If we come together to collaborate to do something, the placebo will not work. Yeah. So in terms of how much of it is placebo versus how much of it is intentional, I believe that what we do is always intentional.
Okay.
However, we are in a state right now where we have done a lot of forgetting. So the things that are intentional may not be the things that we want to be intentional. Meaning there are certain rituals that we are performing as people that we are not marking as ritual. Like when you wake up first thing in the morning, you grab for your phone. And you don't realize you're doing that constantly. Yeah, and you're trying to figure out why your energy, because you didn't pray first. You didn't go pour your water or your liquids or whatever you just do. You didn't go wash your tail, you didn't brush your teeth. You didn't oil pull. You didn't play your drum. But you're trying to figure out why I off today, boy. Yeah? What we watching and we intaking on social media, how we're engaging with people, that we're not paying attention to our daily rituals and how that impacts our life and the people around us. So the how much is intentional, I believe that it depends on the practice and the person. It depends on how they're using their body and their energy and their intention. Yeah. But I feel like the placebo will work just good too. If I exercise every day, but I don't have the Obeah walk, right? All the technical parts of it, I could make it. Can I make it better if I employ other things? Absolutely. Symbology is also what I put on, the colors that I wear, the lipstick I decide to put on. Yeah. Who am I buying it from? Who food I eat today? It was my food or somebody else's hand. And these are things that, as I think Caribbean people, as African people, we know. You know when not to eat from somebody.
Yes.
But we override those things because of society, because I'm inside an institution, because I'm inside a church, because my friends say. We've forgotten how to follow our vibration. Vibration is real. The sound of someone's voice. Yeah. I have a real sensitive kind of thing with me, and I would override it constantly. And I'm learning in my life that I can no longer do that. So I'm getting in tune with my Wanga. Wanga and Obeah have two different effects for me. One enacts something and one wards something. Yeah. I hush you now. Okay, I feel like I'm more than answering the question.
I want to thank you very much, Jamie. I'm going to come back.
Thank you.
I want Burton. I want to ask Burton. what is this question? Is Obeah a science, a spiritual science of practice rather than organized, tested practice? I want Burton to talk to me about that. And what makes it that, whatever it is?
Well, I follow, who inspired me a lot in the whole journey was, well, he's now among the ancestors, that's Chief Abiodun Leroy Clark, who really spoke about Obeah as the life of African people, what you might say, the cosmology of African people. It's also that energy in the universe that African people can.
Please highlight Burton for everybody. Thank you.
Pardon?
Sorry, Burton. I just want him to highlight you.
He needs to put on his camera in order to highlight
yeah,
it.
I need to turn on my camera. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's also that energy in the universe that African people access, and I think I even heard the elder say once, you can say that every culture has its Obeah, right? Has its way of accessing, that energy. What we call technology, we can call just as well the white man's Obeah. how they have developed their science in a certain way, often to dominate and control, but in a certain way, and I think as well in connection, because I was asked in joining the panel, I think, to comment on this, how the spiritual Baptists intersect with different spaces and different energies, different nations, and I think the spiritual Baptists, in terms of how they work that Obeah, has a science of accessing and of channeling that energy that I think is very important, and I don't think they always are given enough credit, and maybe even you all don't give yourselves enough credit for that. One concern I have in terms of how Trinidad works now is that there's this idea, and Jamie brought up this thing about these different paths, these different African paths. There's this idea floating around that Orisha is the real African religion, quote unquote. Religion is another word I don't like, right? Orisha is the real African religion, and those Baptists, they're African, yes, but they're Christian and thing. Now, I believe, for one thing, Aristotle has no right here. It's not one or the other, right? It's not a matter of are they Baptist, Christian, or are they African in their spirituality. There's no exclusion here. And that's a thing about African cosmology, as Kitty pointed out. It's not an exclusive cosmology. One thing I came to talk about, and it relates to how the Baptists work this Obeah, is through what you all call the seals, the SEALS, the seals. And this notion of sealing is rooted in a Congo practice, as Jamie would know, and it's a Congo practice that can be seen in terms of what is called the Congo cosmogram, or the sign of the 4 moments of the sun, the Tendwanza Congo. And this practice of sealing is found throughout this hemisphere. In Voodoo, it is called Veves. In Cuba, among the Palo people, who are not Yoruba, but they are Congo, although a lot of the times in Cuba, same people do both. In Palo, it is called firmas. In Brazil, it is called pontos, or very interesting, points, as in pointing, points, right? Even Jamaica has it, but it's not.
Recording in progress.
West has lost, and even the Western Academy has lost. It might look at culture. Often when you hear, it wouldn't be complete if I didn't take a swipe at anthropologists, but none whose work I know here. Let me get that clear. But often in Western social science, you get this idea that culture is some kind of empirical movement of elements in the void, right? It's kind of based after Newtonian mechanics, which the scientific method in the West is based on, or was based on. But really and truly, for us, culture and cosmology is an organic living thing. And the seal and the tradition of the seals reveal this organic principle that has found itself across the hemisphere, and is so central in how the spiritual Baptists work their Obeah, how they work their Obeah. And if you look at the Congo cross, which is kind of like, if you want to look at a way of understanding it, the horizontal represents this differentiation of worlds, of spaces, and the vertical, which shows itself in the center pole, in Haiti they call it the potomita, shows the possibility of accessing, cutting across and accessing worlds, right? And that is what, when the Africans came here, they recognized they were from different traditions, themselves nations, right? Different worlds that are coming together. Now we speak of the Indian nation, the African nation, and the Chinese nation, right? We speak of different spiritualities which can be accessed, like the Baptist work, the Orisha work, the Kabbalah work, the Indian work, right? The accessing of worlds, all of which you can see functioning through the seal. And I didn't mention, it is also strong in Venezuela. Venezuela has a traditional religion that's very African. It's called Maria Leonza. It is one of the most intense things you can run into. Don't write up the pennies, right? And like, looking at the film of it, they actually put you to lie down inside the seal in terms of their own spiritual operation, which is, you can say, you're actually doing when in the morning chamber. So it's a science that is very much a part of us. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Burton. Thank you very much for that. I wanna throw, before I talk to Fadike, I wanna ask, what are
yeah.
What is Jamie sent me a note, and I really want her to respond to that note that she sent me. And that question, what are the socio-political, socio-economic, psychological, emotive, somatic, and spiritual impacts of Obeah on the practitioner and those intended to be the...
I like you, It's you talk me from a little after midnight appearance, and then you're pulling out these questions that are really book long things. Okay, so
yes, I want you to respond to that.
I think that, and I'll since this conversation is centered around Brent's book, I'll go back to the book and how he brings up the different social economic things that happened around the death of the young people in Moruga. Also the social political things that would have occurred around that, right? How that would have affected that community psychologically, how it would have affected people's bodies, how it affected people's emotions, right? So the question is about these effects on the practitioner of Obeah, and I'm putting it in quotes because I feel like Obeah is literally, for me, yes, there's a practice of Obeah, but it's literally, and I said this last year, it's how we cook with food. It is how I prepare myself, how I get dressed. It's how I speak to my loved ones, right? So the Obeah that was actually practiced in that moment inside of the book that Brent wrote, and the effects that it may have had on the practitioner, he actually lays it out on what the effects were for the families and for the practitioners of Obeah. For me personally, I'll speak from being a Kalinda practitioner, and I'll speak from my encounters with practitioners and being someone who was a class, you could say, but I don't want to even say client because I believe that there is no separation between the client and the practitioner. At that point, we are both working Obeah together because both of our energies are compiled to do that thing. The effects of it, I think, would be as any other psychosomatic drug that someone would take. If someone was taking, even though we take it, bring it all a little bit lower, if someone was taking an aspirin, you want the aspirin to heal you, but there's a psychological effect that happens before that aspirin actually heals you. Yeah, the political implications of the aspirin because the pharmaceutical company making the aspirin. Yeah. What was the other one?
Spiritual
The
impact
motive.
on the practitioner.
Socio-political and socio-economical, right?
Political, socio-economic,
right.
Psychological.
Somebody's making money off of that aspirin, right? And it's not you, right? The aspirin may or may not heal you. Yeah? The same thing with the Obeah. If you do not believe in the thing that the Obeah person or practitioner has given, I know we keep using the word Obeah, but it could be the pastor, it could be whomever, right? That they've said to you, okay, you need to go home and you need to do spiritual worker. You need to go home. You need to do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you skip 3, you have already a doubt in your mind that is going to work.
Yeah.
Because you were told to do 1, 2, 3, and 4.
At a particular time.
At a particular time. Within a particular time frame. Yeah. So the minute that you miss that, psychologically, you're going to be affected by that. Emotionally, you're going to be affected by that because you know you didn't listen. Yeah. And then economically, you've been affected because most likely you've given some sort of compensation to this person to do, right? Politically, I think that the political part will come in moments of, in the space now of social media, when there's different debates, like Bert was talking about, you know, we have this thing of whose religion is better, who actually works, right? Which is a bunch of nonsense, right? He talked about the cosmogram. For me, I want to go back to something that we all have seen growing up as the cross. The cross is the crossroads, right? And at some point, those things are all intersecting. All those spiritual paths are intersecting into this one center space. We're all trying to get to the same thing. So it doesn't matter what we choose to get there. I need to respect what you choose. Yeah, and that will ease some of the emotional, that will ease some of the socio-economic part of it, because whether you decide to go to church and say I'm paying tithes at church, or I'm investing in this particular organization, or whatever the case may be, you're making an impact, right? There's also collective, right? So the church has I grew up in church for a long period of time, has a very collective energy. However, when my mother passed away, that collective energy shifted to a certain degree. It became about politics. Yeah. It didn't matter that my mother was feeding people every Sunday. It didn't matter that she was feeding the sick. It didn't matter that she was going to feed the homeless on Wednesday. It became about what money do we have to bury my mother. Yeah. So all those different things come into play, and hopefully that answers the question a bit. Yeah. It's a difficult question to answer. So I'm not going to try to answer more than I just did.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Fadike, it's your turn to talk to us about your experiences. You have some, and I am particularly interested. I have a strong, deep desire to visit Jamaica and to experience the revivalists and Zionists. I have a strong desire to do that. And so that I've always been fascinated with what I see. And when I hear about the Jordanites and the Panamanians and the Zionists, it all resembles it. We're like cousins. Spiritual Baptist, Zionists, the Panamanian, they'll be like cousins. And not second cousin, not third cousin, like brother and sister children. When I look at how we respond to our spiritual inclinations are so similar, and I feel a brotherhood, a sisterhood inside of it. Okay, so and so talk to us about your experience and respond to what has been happening in the conversation this evening. Welcome.
Yes, a pleasant good evening. It's so wonderful. I want to thank all the organizers for having me here, and I want to thank my ancestors and my elders for bringing me to this point. But Pastor, in regards to your question, I think that we would defer to the expertise of Kayete Brown, Dr. Kayete Brown, who's at University of Texas, Austin, and who has been doing tremendous research in Jamaica on Revival Zion. My own work is about 20 years of.
I think you need to come a little closer to your microphone, I think. We're not here.
Can you hear me?
I know, yes, better.
I was saying, I think that for your question, you really would want to talk to Kayete Brown, who's been doing research for over a decade on Revival Zion in Jamaica. My own background, both personally as a Trini and as an ethnographer, is about 2 decades or so of research in Orisha and Ifa in Trinidad. So I would pass the stage over to Kayete for that conversation that you want to have.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Fatike. Is it possible for me to share my screen? Oh, I think you're unmuted.
But it's just give her you got you?
Okay, I think so. I just wanted to bring up, since Burton had actually brought up the seals, I just wanted to just give a quick show of that really quickly. Just make myself smaller right here. Quickly. Yeah, so just really quickly. So of course I work on Revival Zion in Jamaica, and actually I went to Trinidad for the first time in 2015. And I remember when I got to the airport, there was a whole display on spiritual Baptist. And at the time I didn't know about Spiritual Baptist Liberation Day. So this is a picture of Revivalist. So I didn't know about Spiritual Baptist Liberation Day or anything like that, but I remember seeing that for the first time in Trinidad at the airport and being really shocked, because in Jamaica, there's no recognition of Revival Zion in that kind of way. And maybe one day we can have a Revival Zion Liberation Day, hopefully. But, it's still very much a religion that is, demonized still in Jamaica, even though many people practice it. It's indigenous to Jamaica. And then the picture that I had up before was also looking at this seal. And could you remind me of the question that you wanted me to address?
My interest is in this similarity that we see among Spiritual Baptists, Jordanites from Guyana, Revivalists, Zionists in Jamaica, and also the Panamanians. What they do is there's so much similarity in what they do, and I've always been fascinated by it. I didn't realize how similar we are in terms of these seals that we use, how we use candles, how we use center pole and flags, how we dress, and the dress is also very similar, and a lot of this is without actually knowing and comparing. It is only when people got to New York. It is when people got to New York and all these people came together to realize, oh, we're very similar. Mm-hmm. And so what I've seen happening in New York, for example, is that there are some Spiritual Baptist churches who originate from Trinidad, but they play music like Revivalists. Mm-hmm. There are some Jordanites who came and some Panamanians who are now Spiritual Baptists, because it's just so similar. And you know that the heart of what we are doing has to have come from Africa. Mm-hmm. I know that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yeah, and actually in 2018, in Panama, there was a pilgrimage of spiritual Baptists from Trinidad, from St. Vincent, and then revivalists from Jamaica, and then revivalists from Panama, all converging together for the first time to all, join with each other and really share and talk about the religious practice. And so that was really a beautiful time to hear about a lot of that. And of course, a lot of these practices are, from sort of Central and Western African practices, sort of commingled with Christianity, right? And in the work that I do, I really talk about sort of the way that, these religions got formed, particularly in the Jamaican context. It comes out of this period of the Great Revival where, missionaries are, coming from the US, looking for this kind of revival of Christianity. But instead of really going to this form of pure Christianity, as people are thinking about, Jamaican revivalists and African Jamaicans are really turning Christianity into something that is more African. And, there's even this one missionary, Hope Waddell, he's writing in the 19th century, and he's describing Revival Zion and saying, it's the strangest combination of Christianity and heathenism that he's ever seen, right? And sort of part of these strange combinations is this idea of, and of course, they're looking at these African practices and Christian practices as antithetical to each other, right? And so the two can't stand together, right? But, it's due to the devotion to a community of spirits, including, earthbound, airbound, waterbound spirits, the inclusion of ancestral veneration, the beating of drums, animal sacrifices, feasting altars, trance journeys, spirit possession, right? And, revival is coming out of, the twin practices of Obeah on one hand and Mile on the other hand at the same time. And so people are seeing this one practice of Mile as this practice of, spirit possession, of, the ancestors coming down and inhabiting bodies. And then on the other hand, Obeah is the part that people have a lot more issues with, right? Because people are thinking about Obeah as this terrifying and sort of, this kind of power that's mostly responsible for misfortune. And sometimes they saw Mile as this power to counteract Obeah. But we're seeing in Revival Zion bringing those two kinds of powers together, as so many of the other panelists have talked about, like this kind of dichotomy between harm and healing and so forth, aren't always as distinct as sort of the Western, canon frames them to be. And so I think Revival is a great space, and Spiritual Baptist, for really reimagining sort of how we can think about a spiritual power.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Something occurred to me, it just slipped me. Two things I want to say. One, I am happy that you spoke about what you met in the airport in Trinidad. I'm saying that because I was director of culture then.
Amazing.
I am happy that you raised it, because those are some of the things the people I used to work with talk about. Okay, because I recognize how important it was for people to understand that. I'm hoping that we're coming down, because I want to give you all an opportunity to answer some questions that I don't know, Shepherdess, if we have some questions that have been asked, because we're coming closer to the time, and I want to try my best to stay close to it. It is, we talk about who we are as we manifest ourselves. The point I want to talk about was about when people shun our discussion about ancestors and make it seem as if there's some kind of darkness, or that we into some kind of darkness. And I remind people, as a Bible scholar, that when Jesus went on that Mount of Transfiguration, his ancestors appeared. Okay, his ancestors appeared with him. Okay, and it's important for and that is the presence of the ancestors was significant to one confirming him and his work. The ancestors confirmed his work to those who he was training for when he would be gone. And so that they would and it was a powerful experience for them when the ancestors came. They validated to them that, yeah, he is the Christ. Okay, and you're on the right track, and you're doing what is right. And it is only when, for me, That's why one of the things that we do at the Academy of Grace, we interpret our spiritual connections to our rituals. So that we use particular Bible lessons to do our rituals, and the Academy of Grace spend time to teach people what is the significance of that, how one ties in with the other. Because we seem to, we find that when we do it, it is Obeah. But when it happens in the Bible, it's not.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that, because in my work with a revivalist, I remember one time I went to the church, and the pastor, the bishop, he was preaching, and he was talking about the fact that in the days of Elisha, there were not a lot of miracles being performed, so people were starting to condemn him for performing miracles, right? And then he talks about the fact that people are condemning oils and people are condemning powders that revivalists use. But he always brings up this idea about in John 9, and he says, in John 9, Jesus mixed his spit and clay and put it on the blind man's eye, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
so he's like, if Jesus is able to mix these things together, and basically Jesus is seen as this almost primeval scientist, right, of the highest order, that's manipulating matter, that's using body fluids and clay together and using that kind of energy to heal people. And so his question is, if Jesus can do that, then why can't we use our things? Amen. Why can't we use our things? And so in my research, a lot of the questions that I ask is, what is it about revivalist things that people find so much animosity to, or have so much animosity towards? And exactly as you said, when you talk to any revivalist, they will frame everything they do in relation to Jesus. Did an example of this before, and when Jesus left, he said we would do greater works. So why, when we're doing the work too, are people condemning us? So I really love that you said that.
Thank you very much. Before we go to questions, as we want to wind up, I want Fadike to make her own comments, to make her own contribution. I'm not asking any question, Fadike. Just talk to us about your work.
Hi, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you guys here today. And I had some comments that I prepared, just small comments that I think just add another layer to this amazing conversation. And I'm so grateful to come in at the end, and after having heard the wonderful words from Dr. Kayete Brown, from Jamie Filbert, from Burton Sankarelli, and of course we opened with Dr. Croissant, whose book I absolutely love and I have comments on as well, but I will save those. I will put those aside. I wanted to say that for me, Obeah is a practice, a praxis, right? As a practice that you do, that you enact in your daily, in how you move in the world, very much the way that Jamie was talking about. It's a spiritual technology whose practitioner could belong to any and many traditions and religions. And just as there are no test of belonging in the use of electricity, right? And somebody else brought up electricity earlier as a form of power, right? I see little test of belonging in the use of Obeah, beyond the barrier of knowledge. Whereas for most, our technologies, our electricity are portable and prepackaged. We plug it in, we flip a switch. Most of the people who access Obeah must get it from an individual who has both the access to spiritual forces and the knowledge to direct those forces. While this may manifest in many different religious traditions across national boundaries and regions, to the praxis of Obeah remains an African birthright, right, which was also spoken of here tonight, that draws on ancestral knowledge of way to engage the often invisible powers that undergird our lives, our ecology and environment, the plants and animals, what many understand as nature, of which we are a central part and not separate from. And therein lies one of the mysteries. And I wanted to segue from that to bring in Professor Tracy Hucks, who is a scholar, who's now a professor at Harvard, who recently published a 2-volume book with another professor, Diane Stewart, right? And if I can bring them over, it's Obeah, and Orisha and religious identity in Trinidad. Right? And I turned to that work, and in the introduction of volume 1, which is a really needed work because it goes into, she went into the archives and pulled up the history of Obeah and the persecution of Obeah in the 19th century in Trinidad and documents it extensively. And it's a much needed exploration and documentation. But in the beginning, she draws on a former elder of Orisha in Trinidad, Baba Samphils, who some people may remember and remember fondly, Ibashe, Baba Samphils, to quote his experience of doing spiritual practices in the 1930s in Trinidad. And the quote ends with, so I want to quote Baba Samphils here, with the fact that, quote, anything that was out of the norms of the society in which we live is Obeah. Anything outside of the norm of the society in which we live is Obeah.
Uh-huh.
I follow Professor Crowson, Brent, if I may, in his definition of Obeah as an experiment with power, and recognize how this builds on not only the lived experience of his friends and family, but also Dr. Kenneth Bilby's work among the Suriname Maroons that Brent referred to earlier, where it means, quote, supernatural force with healing and protecting magic power, or healing and protective power. And for me, this raises some interesting questions. What norm and whose society? So perhaps it raises more questions than giving a definitive, even if that was a goal definition of Obeah, it gives us a boundary of out of this norm, right? So what I was thinking about today as I was preparing for this panel was the extent to which any power that was against the colonial and imperialist structuring of reality, against their exploitation, their degradation, and their extraction from African peoples, any power that would be a source of resistance was called Obeah.
Obeah, yes.
Any source of our power, and anything that would remove us from that power. Right? So it's become very clear to me, and Taki's revolt was brought up by Dr. Carlson, by Brett earlier, that the fear of that power and the denigration of that power is because that power was a source of resistance. Going back to the Haitian Revolution and going back to Maroon communities and revolutions throughout the Americas. Professor Hux and Stewart do a very timely intervention in the scholarship, which is where they distinguish between capital O Obeah and small O Obeah, which is hard to do, of course, verbally, right? But where for them, the capital O Obeah is Africana conceptions of Obeah, right? The source of spiritual power that we have access to. And the lowercase is referencing the colonial invention of Obeah, the colonial imagining, beliefs, discursive ideologies, and so forth. So I want to venture that when we talk about the denigration and why people have a negative view of Obeah, they are misconstruing the small lowercase colonial construction of Obeah from the capital O Obeah, which is aligned with the African divine spiritual knowledge and power, if that makes sense. So that was something that I wanted to contribute and offer.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, all these perspectives, and these are conversations that we need to have, and we need to continue to have, if we are to find ourselves, because I am one of those people who think that the more we understand this, the closer we are to finding our center, who we are, what we have come here to do, and therefore getting ourselves on track to doing what we have come here to do. Because, and our ancestors keep, like Jesus' ancestors continued to teach him to validate his work, to validate his presence. And we take that for those of us who are Christians, practicing as Christians, in this part of the world, we must, I constantly go back to the Bible to help understand what we do, because some of us are afraid of what are the African practices that are part and parcel of who we are, and some of us kind of separate ourselves, divide ourselves in half, when really it's just one self trying. And when we reconcile all of this, we become the most powerful force that we were made to be, and that is important to me. As shepherdess, do we have questions? We have to ask, I guess. We are now 2 minutes after 9, and our intention is to finish at 9. If we do have...
No, we don't have any chat, Pastor.
Okay.
We have a lot of comments.
Okay, great. So people have been interacting.
People have been interacting and commenting on what the panelists have been saying. There was some reference asking that the books that the panelists would have referred to. Persons were wondering if you can put the names of the books and the author in the chat, so that persons can avail themselves, I suppose, of the book that you referred to.
Because you have everybody's email, because they have to register. What Kaiti and Fadike will send us the information, and Brent, and we will create a book list, okay? And I will send it out to everybody by email. Okay, somebody wanted to share some result. Okay, so thanks, Felicia. Just send it to me, and I will put it together in a release for everybody to get it in an email. Okay, because people, I am also interested in some of the books that were mentioned. Okay, so we promised the group that we will do that. That we'll send it out to them. That was it, shepherdess.
Yes, that was it. That's a lot of comments. Some people were saying that they would allow the panelists to speak and not butt in. Let me see if I can get back that comment so I can ask the person to say what they were going to say.
But somebody did ask Kaiti if there were laws in Jamaica affecting Zionists. That's a Caribbean thing, right? Phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Obeah laws are Caribbean.
Yeah, the Obeah laws, essentially. So because, I think in 2013, there's debates in Jamaican Senate over decriminalizing Obeah. And of course, it caused a lot of uproar where on one hand, some people were saying, well, no good Christian should care about the decriminalization of Obeah, because only people who are participating in Obeah should care about this. And if you're a good Christian, you shouldn't be doing that anyway. So that's none of your business. And then on the other hand, some people were saying decriminalizing Obeah is going to cause the island to go down into destruction and so forth. But because there tends to be an association and a conflation of revival with Obeah, and saying revival is an Obeah church, because of the illegality of Obeah, I think revival has a precarious position to the law. And so there's not too many ways that people tend to, no one's getting rounded up by the police necessarily for those practices, but the Obeah law definitely highlights revivalists as people who are dealing in, quote, instruments of Obeah. And because the idea of instruments of Obeah is also very vague and wide, if they were to start doing that, then certainly revivalists would end up, really facing a lot of the brunt of that.
Okay. We are closing, and Jamie, it is early in the morning. Okay, and it is time for your bed. I know that is close to daylight for you, and so that.
Thank you for having me. Blessings to everyone. Give thanks for your energy. I wrote it in chat just now, but for your honorable intentions and your bodies being present. I am very tired. My brain is shutting down.
Yes,
So
darling.
have a blessed one. See you all next time. Nice to
Yes,
meet
take
everyone
care.
too.
Take care. Thank you. And
Burton Sankarali wanted to make a comment,
yes,
Pastor, before you close.
yes, I do. I was going to do that. Allow Burton, and then I want Brent to make the closing before we ask Nalis to give us our thank you. Okay, we let Nalis give us the last word, but Burton and then Brent and then Nalis to close off. Yes, Burton.
Start my video. Okay. When we look at these strong parallels between these different traditions, it's not only a matter of independently developing. It's not even only a matter of the fact that they have a source in specific African traditions, and these traditions are organic and they were maintained in a way that is often not given credit for, intact to a large extent by researchers who don't understand how the culture works. But I don't think we properly understand the movement of our own people and how they have spread things from Trinidad, Jamaica, St. Vincent, which is an important source for shouters because they were the Shakers from the American South, who came here with both the Americans and came to Jamaica with the native Baptists. I think going back to the 18th century, and these connections of the movement of our own people and how these traditions have shaped each other through this kind of contact. Because up to now, I still don't think we have a good accounting as to how the spiritual Baptists really arose in terms of these kinds of connections,
Yeah, thanks for that. We have in our first panel discussion, we talk a lot about that. In our first panel discussion about the prohibition ordinance and the history of the Baptist faith, and we are doing a report on it. Okay, of that first panel discussion. Now I want to give Brent a chance to bring us some closing remarks.
I just wanted to say thank you so much again to all the panelists and to the organizers. This has been really amazing. And I think, one of the themes that came up for me was this balance between, we saw the seals, which is really striking, the seals that you showed, Kaiti, the parallels with spiritual Baptist seals, and so that at the one hand there's all these parallels and commonalities that we can see, and then Jamie also made the point that there's differences, that the Ifa or Orisha and spiritual Baptist, they're not all one thing, and they have different forms of governance and integrity on their own. And I think both of those things are important, for me to keep in mind. Like in my book, I talk about people that describe themselves as following the threefold path, where they would do something in spiritual Baptist, in Kabbalah, and in Orisha, but they didn't see those paths as being one thing. And in fact, a lot of people in Trinidad disagree upon whether those paths should all be followed or not. Kabbalah gets stigmatized in a lot of ways. Orisha might be off limits for a lot of spiritual Baptists. I talked about that with some people about how, spiritual Baptists might give an opening prayer to an Orisha ceremony, but then leave because they're opposed to animal offerings made. So there's, at the same time that we see all these commonalities, and there's also an integrity that each of these traditions has. And I think that as opposed to a Western framework, which sees religions as like mutually exclusive and opposed, like Burton said, the either or kind of idea, there is something like maybe we could call it like an Africana technology of dealing with difference that allows for difference, but also the ability for the confluence of that, and the idea that certain traditions might be good for different things, and that doesn't mean that everybody follows all those traditions or anything like that, but there's a certain way that kind of diversity with integrity isn't necessarily antagonistic in that framework. And so I think that was something that we had wanted to talk about, and I think that the spiritual Baptists is a vast religion, you know, and I think that's something to be celebrated, rather than, you know, I was talking to somebody in Haiti, and they, you know, said when they go to a Vodou temple in another part of the island, sometimes they don't even understand what they're doing. But for him, that wasn't a bad thing. It just showed how vast the religion was. And then I think there's a lot of practices that are like that in their vastness, where there's great variation within spiritual Baptist tradition, even as it has a cohesiveness. And that's something that I think we could celebrate. So those are my closing comments. I was amazed by all of the presenters and panelists, and I'm just so thankful to be a part of that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Brent. Thank you very much. Before I ask Nalis to do the thank you, I want to read one comment from somebody we see her name A.O.G. Okay, A.O.G. says it is clear that we can define what Obeah is, and that it can mean different things to different people, both negative and positive, and also positionality in the use of the word. My concern then is a question of, do we in the diaspora of African traditions and spirituality collectively accept this term to describe our rituals and practices? And if so, how can we frame this term to be used appropriately? And he says, for me, we all have Obeah. We all work Obeah, and Obeah is ritual and practice. Obeah is a way of life. Live your Obeah. I think that's a very powerful. Thank you very much, Adeola, for this comment. Thank you, and thank you all for turning up and coming out. Okay, I want to hand over to Ms. Daniela Fraser, Director of the Heritage Library Division, who will give her closing remarks and close us off this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
I am so honored to have this privilege to give the vote of thanks as we come to the end of our program this evening. I want to thank Bishop Richard Aberdeen for your blessing of our event with your prayer. Thank you, Ms. Jasmine Simmons, Acting Deputy Executive Director of NALIS, for your opening remarks. We appreciate your confirmation of NALIS's commitment to continuing with this fruitful collaboration. And I think we can all agree with Ms. Simmons when she said that events like these help us understand ourselves and understand our history. Thank you, Deaconess Janice Burgess, for introducing the Academy of Grace Institute of the Holy Spirit and highlighting all of its important past and ongoing work. And of course, thank you to the Academy for all of your behind the scenes work in making this event a success. Thank you, Shepherdess Juliet Forbes, for introducing our wonderful panelists and for moderating the comments and questions in our very active online chat. I want to extend thanks to all of the panelists for taking the time to contribute to this very important discussion. Thank you first to Pastor Ingrid Ryan Rubin for moderating tonight's wonderful panel of experts and icons. Pastor, I think you skillfully drew out such rich morsels of knowledge and wisdom from our panelists with all of your questions and guiding that discussion. So thank you so very much. Assistant Professor J. Brent Croissant, your thoughtful insights from your book, Experiments in Power, help set the tone of our discussion. And of course, NALIS looks forward to adding it to our catalog, especially at the Heritage Library Division. So thank you so very much, Professor Croissant. Assistant Professor Katie Brown, thank you for bringing the Jamaican and the wider Caribbean perspective to the discussion. Your insight was able to show that there are those deep connections across this part of the African diaspora, and that was greatly appreciated. We must thank Ms. Jamie Filbert for joining us on her very early morning from the UK. We appreciated her sharing her experiences and knowledge, the intersections of intention, body, form, and belief in these rituals that we were discussing. Thank you so much, Ms. Filbert. And Mr. Burton Sankarali, your exploration on the tradition of the seal across cultures was very enlightening. And I thank you for your analysis of the connections of which we're often very not aware. And Assistant Professor Fadike Castro, your distinctions regarding spiritual power was a welcome balance to this panel. And thank you so very much for your insights and the resources that you shared. We look forward to getting that listing as Pastor promised us. And I want to finally thank the audience for your participation, all of your comments and your questions and the engagement that you had going on as we actively listened to our panelists would have helped, of course, to make this event so much more of a success. And I'm sure I can speak for all of us in the audience that we have learned so much from this discussion, and we are truly appreciative of all of the participants. And so I just want to end by saying thank you, everyone. Of course, we would like to wish you a good night, continue to be safe, and thank you once more. I'll say back to you.
Yes. Thank
Pastor.
you. Thank you.
No
Thank you.
problem.
Thank you. Ms. Fraser, thank you. And so I want to say thanks, thanks. I give you thanks for all you've done. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, all of you. And we could all open our mics and say good hello and goodbye. Thank you very much, Brent. Thank you, all of you, for this. And you will soon be seeing our printed report, Brent, from the last discussion. Okay, before we got around to it and say that will soon be on the shelves. And we will have a chance to experience it for Obeah 2, Obeah 1, and Obeah 2. And then perhaps amongst us all we determine what we're going to be talking about for 2024. Have a good night, folks. It's been wonderful having you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Mom. Good night, everyone. Tomorrow at very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.